Coming up, Taylor Swift is accused of pumping 138 tons of CO2 from her private jet. Pop megastar comes under fire for her massive carbon footprint.
If highly visible celebrities won't accept climate policies, the public probably won't either.
We look at the connection between dwindling water levels in the Panama Canal and the ongoing drought in parts of Brazil's rainforest.
Amazon deforestation causes less rain to fall across the rest of the Americas.
And as millions of people party during Carnival across Brazil, authorities behind the scenes scramble to contain a deadly threat. Just 2 degrees starts right now.
Temos uma nova epidemia, infelizmente.
It has been hot and humid in parts of the Caribbean and South America. That means ideal temperatures for mosquitoes to lay their eggs and multiply. Not a great time for Brazil. The country and region are experiencing spikes in dengue fever, also referred to as breakbone fever because of the severe joint pain that comes with it. Dengue is spread by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which transmits the virus when they feed on us for blood.
Eu comecei com febre, dei coceira no corpo, muita moleza, muita dor, então fiquei muito mal, né?
Nós temos atendido em média 300 a 350 pacientes ao dia.
Dengue is a virus spread by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which, as you might infer from its name, originally cropped up in Egypt. The first recorded cases of it are hundreds of years ago in China. This mosquito arrived in Brazil during colonization period and originally caused a lot of problems because it carries other diseases, including yellow fever. So in the 1950s, the Brazilian government completely eradicated the mosquito using DDT and other chemicals that aren't even legal anymore. It came back in the 70s, in the 60s, and then when they cut money on the prevention program. And the first cases of dengue in Brazil started in the 1970s, and the first cases of deaths from dengue in the 1980s. It's a virus that the name comes from the Yoruba language. It means like bone breaking, literally, because you feel like your bones are breaking. I've had it before. It comes with a very high fever that comes and goes, so high that sometimes it causes hallucinations. And in rare cases, it can start the body to hemorrhage. And in this case, it causes deaths. Last year in Brazil was a record, all-time record of deaths from hemorrhaging dengue. Over 1,000 people died with 1.6 million cases registered.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that one. I believe it's called dengue hemorrhagic fever. We have it in the Caribbean as well. I mean, this must be a real challenge for authorities, particularly when mosquitoes, not only do they breed in stagnant water that we don't always see around us, but they hide in like people's clothing cabinets under the bed. It's so hard to catch them sometimes. How are authorities addressing this in a way that it does not disrupt the carnival season? I mean, there are millions of people there for carnival.
Well, I think it's important to prevent, to wear repellent if you come to Brazil for carnival. This is a mosquito that mainly bites during the daytime. Wear long pants. But what the government's doing is, first of all, a good thing is that this mosquito doesn't thrive in dirty water. So in most of the big cities where you have these open canals full of sewage and things like that, that doesn't create breeding grounds for the mosquitoes. What causes breeding grounds are abandoned buildings and anywhere where rainwater is allowed to accumulate. So there's a surge this year. They're saying it's going to be the worst year ever. 10,000 cases already registered in the state of Rio de Janeiro just in January because of heavy rains caused by climate change. There's been very heavy rains in the Brazilian southeast, and this is causing all of these areas of accumulated rainwater where the mosquito is thriving right now. The city government of Rio has set up 10 centers to treat people with dengue. It's very important to stay hydrated, even if you've got the hemorrhagic kind. If you stay hydrated, it's normally enough to stay alive. And also they're spraying insecticides, and sending health agents door to door in neighborhoods across the city to inspect their backyards to see if they have tires there, if they've got water tanks with no lid on them.
And is there a dengue vaccine in the works?
There's one that has been developed in Japan, and Fiocruz, the National Public Health Institute, has announced that they're going to begin rolling it out, prioritizing first children between the ages of 10 and 14, who are the demographic group most likely to be hospitalized with dengue. And they're going to announce the list of cities where they're going to begin using the vaccine this upcoming Monday. And the suspicion is that this will probably be cities in southeastern Brazil and in the Midwest, where the dengue cases are currently surging.
Something you said to me was really interesting, is that there are heavy rains in that area in the southeast, and in the Amazon region, in parts of the Amazon, there are droughts which are affecting places as far as Panama, which we talked about earlier in the program. Well, Brian, thank you much for your time. Really appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now down to Central America. The Panama Canal has been considered a marvel of engineering since its construction a century ago, but it's highly dependent on rainfall, a fact that's become a lot more evident with the 2023-24 El Nino effect throwing much of the world's weather systems in chaos.
The Panama Canal, an engineering marvel. The 82-kilometer-long passage has connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans since 1914, a shortcut that forever changed international trade as it allowed ships to avoid the dangerous journey around the southern tip of South America. But last year, one of the severest droughts Central America has ever seen threatened to cripple the critical shipping route.
Este tema de sequía es un tema global. Lo tiene el río Mississippi, el Rin, Amazonas, Yangtze. Prácticamente todas las rutas pluviales del mundo están siendo afectadas. Y por supuesto, y lo hemos dicho desde hace varios años, el Canal de Panamá tiene una desventaja fundamental que es la única ruta marítima global.
While the canal connects two oceans, ships are moved through a system of locks that are fed by fresh water from Lakes Gatun, Alajuela, and Miraflores, the same lakes that provide water for more than half of Panama's 4 million citizens. The canal also rakes in nearly $2 billion in tolls from the 13,000 to 14,000 ships that cross every year, with $270 billion in cargo. But a lack of rainfall has forced a dip in lake water levels, causing a traffic jam as lock operators struggle to bring them through. Canal crossings, which were once 35 to 40 a day, were slashed to 32 last year and will be slashed to 24 this year, with an economic loss of $500 to $700 million. Canal authorities warned that Panama should seek new water sources for both the canal's operations and human consumption.
La población ha crecido, estamos poniendo más plantas potabilizadoras, el número de barcos ha crecido, tenemos un canal ampliado y las medidas que se tomaron para la operación del canal ampliado, que fue profundizar, elevar el nivel operacional del lago Gatún, que nos permite almacenar 2 pies por arriba del tradicional, y el uso de las tinas de ahorro de agua, estamos viviendo que en un año muy seco no es suficiente.
We reached out to the Panama Canal Authority for comment. Their response was, quote, "We don't do interviews." And meanwhile, economist James Meadway does not live in Panama, nor is he Panamanian, but he does believe there's a direct link between deforestation in the Amazon and the drought affecting the canal.
All right, so James, there's a lot of blame going to El Nino because of what's happening in the Panama Canal. But you said on Twitter that, quote, Amazon deforestation may cause the drought-stricken Panama Canal to dry up entirely. Explain that.
So this is to do with the complicated interaction between how weather systems operate and how much the natural world kind of functions, how things fit in. So El Nino is this huge climatic pattern that you get every few years. It varies, 5 to 7 year cycles, that parts of the Pacific Ocean heat up at really massive scale, so the surface temperature rises. This causes elsewhere in the world, through the atmosphere, droughts, for instance, in India, massive rainfall elsewhere. What you found happening around the Panama Canal in Central America is a very severe drought. So that's the El Nino part of it. The Amazon deforestation part is that the Amazon rainforest acts as a kind of big sink, both for carbon from the rest of the world, that it's absorbed by the trees there on one side. On the other hand, it also generates just a great deal of hydration. And because the Panama Canal, so that hydration rises into the atmosphere and causes rainfall elsewhere across the rest of South and Central America. Because the Panama Canal, unlike the Suez Canal, for instance, depends on fresh water, so it's filled with reservoirs of fresh water. It collects from the rain in Panama, goes into the canal, and this enables the canal to keep flowing as you move the ships along. Because it depends on that rain falling, Amazon deforestation causes less rain to fall across the rest of the Americas, and that means the Panama Canal over time is actually at some risk of drying up. It needs really a very great deal of rainfall arriving in Panama to keep the thing open. Historically, this hasn't been a problem. Panama's historically been one of the wettest countries on the planet, right? It rains a lot there. What's happened over, actually, it's probably the last 18 months or more now, is this very severe drought means that there are restrictions on the amount of water coming through the canal. That means there's restrictions on the number of ships and how big the ships can be that can move through the canal. And that means there's restrictions on the amount of trade that can take place through the canal.
Yeah, I think that explanation in the beginning you gave kind of details exactly why the Amazon is often called the planet's air conditioning system, which of course moderates global climate. But what about a lot of the deniers, the climate deniers, who may say, okay, so what? So what if the drought in the Amazon is affecting the Panama Canal? Talk about the economic consequences and how regular people in a different part of the world might actually be feeling the pinch from this.
Well, this is where we all start to feel some impacts of climate change. That climate change isn't just some big scary thing that might happen in the future. It's happening now, and its effects are being felt everywhere. And that's not just like things where you see there's some terrible flood in Pakistan or somewhere in the world, or some big obvious disaster. This can be on a day-to-day basis. So if you take the Panama Canal, about 2/5 of the trade of seaborne trade between the US and Asia goes through the canal, and it's about 5% of global trade. It's absolutely huge. If you start to restrict that, if you say fewer ships can come through because there's less water in the canal, and those ships have to be smaller, it costs more to either take things through the canal because there's now a queue of ships waiting to get in. Also, they're smaller. Bigger ships are generally cheaper to sail around if you can, because that's why you sell these bigger ships. Or they have to get diverted all the way down the south of America like this, which adds like a week onto the journey, if not more, onto your journey time. So everything starts to cost more that was coming through the Panama Canal. So an obvious example of this, actually, and one that's likely to have a fairly immediate impact, is liquefied natural gas. Gas is produced in the US from fracking, is put and refrigerated, put into ships, which then sail across the rest of the world to Europe to meet its gas needs and into Asia. This stuff has to be transported quickly because it's quite expensive to refrigerate it. If it's restricted, that means less gas supplied into Asia in particular from the US. That means gas prices, natural gas prices, start to rise. And we've seen over the last few years what happens once gas prices rise, everybody's heating bills go up. But it's not just that, it's anything coming from China going through to the eastern seaboard of the US in particular, and some of it out to Europe, will also start to see its price increases. If the restrictions in the canal are extended over this year, and the Panama Canal Authority says they're going to last until at least April, you're looking at another 5% or so on the costs of moving goods through it and costs of moving goods around there, and that's billions of dollars. That turns into eventually costs for us when we go to the shops.
Another question regular people ask is that if the Panama Canal is fed by these natural lakes in the country, why not just use seawater to compensate for the lack of fresh water?
That's an interesting proposal. That is a huge engineering project by itself. That involves basically saying we're going to redesign the entire canal. So, potentially you can start to look at some of the options around this, but it's not something you can do immediately. I mean, it took years to build. Saying let's just build another one is it's a radical solution, but it's hardly addressing the problem right now. The other issue with this freshwater, by the way, is that it's not only the canal that has to use it. That same freshwater has to go to make sure that Panama's population have water they can drink. So there's lots of demands on the water there. isn't just the canal. So it's not really like the case you can just divert more water into it very easily. Either that means less fresh water for people to drink, and this obviously isn't really acceptable, or you're talking about something that's really an entirely new engineering project.
I believe there's a flora and fauna, there's an ecosystem in this canal that authorities are worried about, and mixing the fresh and salt water could have a devastating effect on them. You initially talked about the Amazon's effect on the Panama Canal and how important it is for us to address climate change. Do you think there's a way to save the canal without addressing climate change?
It's not. I mean, look, you can continue using the canal with the restrictions. To be honest with you, the way things are playing out as climate change worsens in its impacts, we are going to see more effects like this. I mean, there are other parts of the world that are affected by droughts, reducing the amount of water in rivers. It happened all the way across Europe last summer when the Rhine was very, very dry, so you couldn't move big ships down it. It's happened to the Mississippi, been happening to the Mississippi in the US. You can't move boats down it, so it's happening around the world. So what you find everywhere is that the likelihood is things start to cost more, that climate change isn't something that we should do because we feel good about saving the planet, right? And sometimes it gets presented like this, and perhaps we should feel good about saving the planet. But actually, the real impact right now is that life is going to get harder and more expensive on a day-to-day basis because of what is happening to the world's atmosphere and because of the damage that we've done and are doing to it.
Taylor Swift's private jet travel is making headlines. She's been accused of generating 138 tons of CO2 in 3 months, equivalent to 12,622 gallons of jet fuel. Sustainability marketing firm Yard found that Swift, in 2022 alone, released some 8,000 tons of CO2 using her private jet. The emissions matched those of more than 1,000 homes in the same year. Swift's spokesperson rejected the numbers as blatantly inaccurate and says the singer hopes to shake it off through carbon offsetting, a practice many climate scientists say fails to address the root problem. The megastar is the latest in a string of celebrities, government officials, and elite business people under fire for their lavish lifestyles. As the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. But the world of the wealthiest and the biggest stars is no black and white film, and to show colorful and dangerous indulgence.
High-end brands, mega yachts, luxury cars, and private jets are commonplace among the rich and famous. But as 1/10 of the global population goes to bed hungry every night, and our climate warms at an untenable rate, the ultra-elite engage in wasteful consumption. The exorbitant lifestyles of the uber-rich play a significant role in extreme weather events. They can afford to endure heat waves, flooding, and drought. Reality star Kim Kardashian, for one, received water alerts in 2022 for her excessive consumption during shortages in California. Climate activists and sustainability firms have taken note. The aviation industry is responsible for around 3.5% of global warming, but more than half is generated by 1% of the world's population. This stems from several factors. The wealthy travel frequently and account for a whopping 70% of flights, and traveling first class has its own carbon footprint. Travelers having hors d'oeuvres and sipping Chardonnay generate up to 7 times more pollution than those in economy. What's worse is those with private jets emit 2 metric tons of CO2 in just an hour. To put that into context, the average person in the European Union produces about 8 tons of emissions over the course of an entire year. Sustainability firm Yard studied the private jet records of several high-profile celebrities and found that for just 71 minutes in the air, their emissions exceeded the average person's annual emissions 482 times. Some countries are tackling the issue. Canada, for example, is clamping down on extravagance with a luxury tax on new cars, boats, and airplanes passed in 2023. China, too, imposed an extra 10% tax on super luxury cars. And in the US, the Luxury Cap Act was introduced to limit the production and consumption of ecologically harmful luxury goods and services.
All right, Celine, let me first get your response to the allegations against Taylor Swift. Do you think her carbon footprint is big news?
Well, of course, indeed. If highly visible celebrities won't accept climate policies in the world at the age of, climate change, the public probably won't either. isn't it? So they must be a role model for the society. And to be honest, celebrities play a very, very different and very, very, important role in elite circle. When, for example, DiCaprio speaks at the United Nations or any CEO at any cocktail party, he's very efficient. He's effectively representing his followers to the policymakers and business leaders with actual power to follow climate and net zero targets by 2050. So, of course, in that regard, Taylor Swift's act is very important, and Swift would need 30 billion house plants to offset her CO2 emissions, and it is really, really good target.
Yeah, a study by digital sustainability consultancy said that she is the world's most carbon polluting celebrity in 2022, and their results had shown that she'd flown around 170 times since January of that year for a year, which is like equivalent to more than about 23,000 minutes in the air. But I thought it was a funny observation that Fox News in the US began talking about her emissions, even though they don't really, report on environmental stuff.
Well, in terms of social justice, from social justice to scientific background, regardless any political, attachment or any political background, this is very controversial issue, of course, because regardless any political issue, private planes emit more than 10 times more carbon than commercial airline passengers. So from private jets to super yachts, here is the climate impact of rich and famous people, regardless their political perspective or political attachment, engagement. So in that regard, we see how pop culture creates greenwashing culture. So to compensate their total poisonous emissions, according to Copernicus Climate Center, the total amount of house plants needed to offset carbon emission for the worst polluting celebrity is 186 billion plants. So it means that you need an area bigger than the state of Vermont. So this is much more important than for the future of our kids. This is much more important than political fights between Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, indeed. And based on those figures you mentioned, I wonder if the mega wealthy and celebrities think about ending all those high emitting activities. I mean, they've always owned private jets, huge yachts, but do you think they care about the argument they should stop using these things because of their effects on the environment?
As I highlighted, celebrities, of course, they are very, very important, role model for the young generations. Thanks to, pandemic, there were some travel restrictions, and scientifically, we realized that if you stop carbon emissions, you can create amazing, beautiful Mother Earth for young generations, and you can breathe very clean air. So this is very important, and this is very, very stronger, very important actually. So, of course, I'm sure that in that regard, money talks, but also celebrities, they should quit their wasteful habits, because of their money thirsty habits. Yes, they are here to engage with people, to communicate with people for the concert, to cheer up the people, but also they have to they have to reconsider their wasteful habits for the mental health of the society, because according to NHS, the biggest mental health culprit is air pollution. So in that regard, celebrities, media tycoons, they need to consider their yearly base emissions, average emissions every year.
Yeah, I'm sure you have mega wealthy people in the UK who have high emissions too. Do you support a climate tax?
Of course, taxation is very, very important in that regard because, as you remember, if you want to launch a very green company, now if you go to United States, you can have 50% tax reduction, thanks to this green investment authorities, Inflation Reduction Act of Biden government. So this is very important. Our French transportation minister has called restriction on private jets, and they announced heavy taxes on the private jets by citing their climate impact and climate targets. So to solve this problem, I always say MMMA rule is very important. So money connected with Master of Science and Artificial Intelligence, and also with the taxation. So we can only fight against climate change by the help of artificial intelligence, Master of Science, and of course, money, investments. So it means taxation.